Good afternoon, Art History 1 from the Parthenon here in Athens, Greece. Actually, that's not quite accurate. This Parthenon here is actually in Nashville, Tennessee. It is the best, most comprehensive Parthenon that we have that's being reconstructed in the world. The Parthenon in ancient Greece, like we saw before, is still in ruins and is slowly in the process of being rebuilt in the traditional manner. It will probably take another 20 years, maybe even 30 years, before it looks like the one in Nashville, Tennessee, which is done in the same style, just on the interior, the decoration does not have animal ivory and gold by the Phidias sculpture of Athena, which we'll see later on today. I hope everything is going very well for you and things are going quite nicely. In this video lecture then, we are going to continue on looking at ancient Greek sculpture. We're going to finish up the male body, which we are very close to finishing, talk about the influences that it has on the female body. And then at the end of the culture, look how the artwork changes over time. So the artwork that we ended on last time is this Greek artwork by Discobulus by Myron. It really is the rise of the human action figure. And as we talked about last time, you'll note all the Greek art aesthetics, the concepts of perfection, politics, philosophy and history, mythology are all going to merge. And you can see perfection very much in this figure. The head size, as I mentioned in the last lecture, is between 1/7 and 1/8, so right in the middle between Lysippus's canon of 1/8 and Polyclitus's 1/7, but still an enlarged head to show intelligence and calm, the control over logic that allows men to vote and women not, because they'll have the smaller normal head size of 1/8. We'll see the curvilinear body and this athletic gold medal winning body, or I should say olive wreath Olympian wearing body. They'll be the model then for future gods as they within the process, and the contrapposto pose and nudity. We're waiting for our slides to actually upload. It's taking a moment. So it's stuck. So let's move on to the next slide, if it will let us. There we go. As long as we're talking about Discobulus and the kind of the discus throw that shows up, one of the things in your video for this week talked about the importance of exercise on college students and literally later on in life, the advantages. The more that you exercise, particularly if you do some outdoor exercise, you can see on the left-hand chart, it boosts the happy chemicals in the brain, in the blue boxes, and improves memory and learning. You actually learn more after you exercise or in an exercise routine. It improves communication, motivation, productivity. And if you look at the things that are just in the yellow, it reduces the number of sick days you'll have to take. It improves your self-confidence, which also can improve in terms of you asking for raises, potentially get more kind of money in the future. It increases relaxation. And so there are huge benefits of exercise. And so I would highly recommend that if you can figure out the time, and this has largely been my challenge as a workaholic, is figuring out the time now to work out, knowing that it will make me a better professor. It will make me actually a little bit more self-confident, and more importantly, will help me actually make my memory a little bit better to help my students out. So this is something I've got to figure out as well. Now the classical sculptures, and I'm going to pull this one, the classical sculptures that we're looking at, come on. I'm just trying to move this one out of the way for you. We're having all sorts of problems this morning. All right, I will have to do it just in that spot to begin with, and then go back. This is the colossal statue of Rhodes by Harries of Lindos. And you will notice that if you haven't already, from my work in here, let's go back to stop share. There, and let's go back to share screen and see if we can't get it off that way. Come on. Come on. Even if I can minimize it, let's try that. All right, none of that's going to work for us today. So I apologize about this. So this is the colossal statue of Rhodes by Harries, C-H-A-R-E-S of Lindos. And what you will notice, it's a very large muscular figure with limited clothing, standing with a crown, almost like the god Helios or the sun god, welcoming visitors into a bay or welcoming visitors onto an island. Clearly, you can see actually that this very large sculpture is going to be our model for the Statue of Liberty today by artist Bartoldi. And there on the right-hand side, you can actually see the written up. How seriously did the Greeks take perfection? Well, This particular statue of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the world, done by Harris of Lindos, there was a major earthquake that actually knocked it down. The ankles actually buckled, the entire thing fell down. You can see the giant head fell to the bottom, was then used as a children's playground. Harris of Lindos, this lasted for about 50 years, was so upset that his accomplishment didn't last forever that he committed suicide in the aftermath, saying that he should have made it stronger to resist the natural forces of the earth. That's how seriously the Greeks take perfection. They take idealism. That someone who created one of the 7 wonders of the world that lasted for somewhere right around 50 years took his own life when a power beyond him, an earthquake, actually shook the ground and took this out. And he realized, I should have known better. Male beauty since our earliest artworks. We have now looked at 4 main societies and 4 different versions of male beauty. We've looked at the prehistoric model and what they thought about male beauty or about the male body itself. We looked at Mesopotamia, we looked at Egypt, and now we've looked at ancient Greece. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to spend a couple of minutes very quickly sketching out or drawing an image of the male figure in each historical style we have studied so far, the prehistoric, the Mesopotamian, the Egyptian, and Greek. Please note in the Mesopotamian and Egyptian, there are 2 different styles you could draw. You only have to choose one of each of them to draw. I would prefer it if you don't look back upon your notes. I want to see that you can actually do it from your memory. Because if you can do it from your memory, then we have basically created a visual Rolodex of things that you need to know about the male beauty and how male beauty has changed over time. So in class, I would give you about 5 minutes to do this. I'm going to walk around providing some corrective feedback. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes and then I will move on to the next slide. Feel free to pause here if you'd actually like to take on this activity. So here are 4 that show up. One happens to be the prehistoric all the way up on the left, and that is, of course, the shaman man from Lascaux Caves. Note, we know him from the stick figure and erect penis. They did not actually make it any more realistic because they were worried about capturing the ka, that idea of sympathetic magic. If you make something very realistic, you might be able to capture and kill part of the spirit force that shows up. The next one over is the Mesopotamian figure, columnar body with the beard. The Egyptian figure gets a little bit more realistic where we actually see muscles, but it's much more rigid. And then we have the perfect model within ancient Greece, which is spear bearer, kind of the modern day gender role that we have of men almost exclusively today. The only things we've done is we made the package a little bit bigger. Thank you to the sexual revolution of the 1960s. And the other thing is we've actually given them a little bit more muscle definition. And we're going to thank Michelangelo during art history too for his hugely creative, over masculine birth of Adam from the Sistine Chapel. When we look at the female form, note the female form shares much in common with the ancient Greek aesthetics of the male form. So this is Aphrodite of Knidos by the artist named Praxiteles in comparison with spear bearer. So what do these 2 images share from Greek art aesthetics, which are over on your right-hand side? Now notice, just like the male figure went through a couple different early developmental phases, such as the Kore, the Koros figure, the Koros figure, and then the Critios boy. In the female figure, we have the same changes that happens over time. We start off over on the left with the archaic Kore, the maiden figure. Note how brightly colored this figure would have been as well. And then we move to the Aphrodite of Knidos, that idea of perfection of the female body that shows up here. Thank you, Ellen. If you couldn't hear her, she said, just keep making art, just keep making art, in her Dory character from Disney, the Pixar movie of Nemo. So artworks that changed the world. Ellen DeGeneres had just introduced us to the Aphrodite of Knidos. Again, another one of the top 15, maybe 20 artworks in the entire history of the planet. One of the reasons why this artwork is so important is because it establishes the female body in the hourglass form that we even shape into many cleaning bottles in underneath your kitchen cupboard. If you go down there, you'll note they have this hourglass form, very much like Aphrodite of Knidos' body. Why? That work was traditionally gender stereotyped and still is gender stereotyped as women's work. And so we gave the female body, We did the same thing with Coke bottles. If you go back and you look at the shape of a Coke bottle, you'll notice many of the same features with the larger breast, then it comes in around the waist, and it goes up around the hips, comes back in for the slender legs. And that is basically trying to give us what is called the waist to hip ratio, where the waist is about is 70 to 80% of the hip ratio. So it's 0.7 to 0.8. So a woman around her hips or women around her waist should be 20 to 30% slimmer than around her hips. Now, this is not my particular ideal that shows up, but it is the ideal around the planet. So if you measure your waist, particularly for females, measure waist versus hips, you can actually see if you fall within this range. Now, no matter where we go within the world, the interesting thing about this is that waist to hip ratio in every society except for one, and we have had about 40,000 human societies on the planet. In every society, barring one, all I have to do is show you the image of a woman's waist to hip ratio. I don't have to show you the private organs of the vagina. I don't have to show you the breast. I literally have to show you the waist and the hips. And if I do that, you can tell me whether that woman is incredibly attractive or not attractive according to that culture. That's how iconic this particular image is. Now, if it has happened in really 40,000 societies with only one exception in human history, that means it must be hardwired into the human brain. Because society, basically, we don't disagree on anything, particularly when we look at 40,000 different societies. So why do you think that women with that waist to hip ratio are generally seen as much more attractive in all but one society? And that is correct. It's the idea of childbirthing hips, the idea of a fertile woman who can give birth within a child. So for women, the ratio should be less than 0.85 in the modern day world, but traditionally it's been 0.7 to 0.8 throughout history. The one idea that shows up is that the one society that doesn't value this, any notion of what one society doesn't value, a 0.7 to 0.8 waist to hip ratio? And there's a reason for the society not valuating it. That's also correct. It's prehistoric art. Remember the Venus of Willendorf? They like large, obese women, like really with a lot of fat on them. Why? It was the ice ages. They were freezing to death. And when you're freezing to death and there's not a lot of food around, a very attractive feature is what you can't have. The idea of the idealized female body. And what can't you have is a large woman who has fat but would have body reserves in case her child was born. She could still feed her child and herself while you were out looking for food. So scientists have determined that if you just see a woman's midsection, you can determine her attractiveness. So Victoria's Secret ad has a Love My Body campaign, and you can notice, and here's the critique of this, how the F am I supposed to love my body looking at this? Again, it's Victoria's Secret. So we have the idea of reduced inequalities. We basically evaluate the female body when we first see it by beauty, but specifically by the waist to hip ratio. It's one of the first things that we actually notice. So it might be one of the reasons that some scientists have speculated that women still make less than men on average in the same job, because we evaluate a woman's talents on some level by childbirth, by her physical kind of sexuality and beauty, just as much as we do her mind. So that might actually be something biologically hardwired that we're going to have to overcome if we want equality in the future. The image of Barbie here is actually just kind of ridiculous as we start looking. If you don't know, Barbie started off as a porn doll. Mattel, actually, when they were finding this particular doll, she was actually in a porn shop and was not selling very well. So if you look at the quote over here on the left, right behind me, it says that her body is so frail it would be impossible to walk, and room for only half of a liver. So she could only have half of a liver with that ridiculous body. If Barbie was a real woman, she'd be forced to walk on all fours because she couldn't hold up her own body. And she would be physically incapable of lifting her oversized head. So her neck, literally, she couldn't lift it. She would need other individuals to lift her up. So her waist to hip ratio is a ridiculous, I think it was somewhere around 0.6. Disney princesses, they haven't fared much better. In many cases, as you look at the yellow box versus the red box, the yellow box is that their eyes are often wider than their stomachs. And that's true of most Disney princesses, which is just a ridiculous feature to have. You know, this is the model for girls to play dressed up princesses, and that body is almost unattainable. Now, for the Aphrodite of Cnidus by Praxiteles, let's go over the major features and why this artwork is so important. But first off, she is calm like the man, and she has a calm emotion even after being exposed naked. This artwork is supposedly Praxiteles was the girlfriend, or the boyfriend of this particular model. This particular model was one of the most important prostitutes in world history, her name being Phryne, which is written here, Phryne. And he actually came into her bath and noticed that she was naked. And supposedly the story goes that the Aphrodite of Cnidus made this gesture, barely covering up anything. Like, really, this is what you see, versus like trying to cover everything up like most people would do. So she was not necessarily bashful about her beauty. And this goes with stories from the ancient world where beauty was a gift from the gods. So if you were nude and beautiful, why would you ever hide it? It was a gift from the gods for you to share with everyone else. Her waist to hip ratio here is exactly 0.7 for ideal beauty. She also still has that beautiful contrapposto pose for balance and movement. She is the model as the most famous prostitute in world history, Phryne. And as far as we know, she is the first millionaire prostitute in world history. She still stands on a platform. Even though she's a woman, she's got this power, particularly this sexual power and stare that impacts men. She's got a 1/8 correct proportion of her head body. So that means she has less control of her emotion. She's allowed to cry. She's allowed to be emotional. And when she is actually calm and centered like she is here, we pay her the ultimate compliment. We say, Phryne, or the Aphrodite of Cnidus, you are so awesome. You act just like a man. And that was actually the greatest compliment. If you want to insult a man, you call them a woman. We do this very much today. Like if we want to cut a man, we call them a bitch, or we call him female genital. Say, hey, you're such a pussy. We use that female genitalia reference to cut into a man, which makes no sense at all. If you've ever seen or been around or heard of the stories of women giving childbirth with that part of their bodies, it really is a remarkable feat. The penis is never going to do that. Small genitalia, it's not a competitive sex market. Remember, sex is available for men and women all the time. It is a bisexual culture. Like Spear Bear, she's got the 13th vertebrae removed, the ideal for perfection here. And her off arm and hand colors, you can see right within here. Later on, this actually sculpture gets broken. And so we repaired it. Later on, we repaired it. When we repaired it, we used a slightly off-color rock. Today, we no longer repair sculptures like that. We're no longer in that phase. And so we would just leave the arm hanging and say that it was broken. We would all understand that. So she is the female that establishes the ideal female gender role in all of human history. So she's calm, which is wonderful, but she's allowed to cry. She's got a smaller head. You can see she got a smaller head. She does not control as much logic. As such, we are not going to give her the right to vote. So this is one of the reasons why women do not get the right to vote, literally until almost exactly 100 years ago from where we currently are in about 1919, 1920, a little bit earlier in actually England, but we are the second nation that gives women the right to vote. But it takes us all the way to 1920 to be able to do that. So a pretty remarkable kind of impact. She can't protect herself. No, she's not working out the gym. She's still in shape, but she's got a little bit of fat on her. That little bit of fat is good. Remember, it's childbirth. The breasts are also fat. So we like that curvilinear body that gets established as the female gender role. As she's not protecting herself, she needs to stay at home and do the housework. She's only allowed to leave the house in general, unless she's a prostitute to get business. She's only allowed to leave the house with escort. So her husband can take her out because then he can protect her. An elderly son can take her out and protect her, an uncle, a father. Otherwise, she generally stays inside for the vast majority of the time, unless she's a slave or a prostitute. Middle-class women just did not wander around because there was very little protection for those women at the time. So it was the man who did the protection. Her main job then is to raise the children, have kids, take care of the house while the guy is not around, or while the father, husband is not around. And then finally, nag the husband when he comes home if he's not good. Hey, you haven't been to the gym today? Why don't you go work out? Because you don't look as good as Hercules if someone comes and attacks us. Don't you love me? Don't you love your children? So nagging becomes a part of that female body, that female idea that we have. Now, the location of the sculpture is very interesting. And so this particular sculpture was put in a public park. And it was so popular, they had to make 7 different copies of it. And they put it in 7 different parks. Today, we have these parks too, like the Volder Park in Amsterdam, which allows public sex. That's exactly what happened. These individuals had a much more large-scale sexual appetite that they didn't necessarily need to control. So one of the things that happens is that people would go to this park and they would take seats around this particular sculpture in all these 7 parks, and they would do what was called Aphrodite business. They would make love, or have sex. They could do this with their homosexual partner, their bisexual partner, with their wife, with a prostitute. If you were a butt man or a butt woman, you could take the butt view in the back. If you really like the side view of the vagina, you could actually go look at the side view of the vagina. You could see the breast almost in any capacity, so you could satisfy yourself anywhere around. And people would literally wait in line for this. And so the Greeks had to come to terms with, was this pornographia or pornography or not? As beauty was a gift from the gods, it so aroused individuals, and that Fran herself became the first millionaire, and she was a prostitute bathing nude. That one day when she was at a temple, and it was very hot out, she went into the lovely Mediterranean Sea and started to bathe herself by taking off all her clothes. There was such an uproar for both men and women that wanted to see this absolutely gorgeous woman. I mean, think about Kim Kardashian posing naked and breaking the internet, or Marilyn Monroe and her $1 million Playboy ad. This was kind of a celebrity taking off all of her clothes, and everyone kind of went wild looking at it. She was charged with indecency, but then during her trial, which you see over here, the individuals that actually were about to judge her, no, they are all men. And my favorite reaction is this guy, like, oh my God, she took off her clothes. Of course, he had seen nude women before Aphrodite of Cnidus, but Aphrodite of Cnidus is the first nude Greek woman that's actually posing nude. They had seen nude women from slaves, but not a Greek woman that would do what they would consider so indecent an act. Ultimately, she was convinced, or she was not convicted, because the argument was made that it's a beauty, her beauty was given to her from the gods, so why should she hide it? It should be for everyone to see. Now, this does bring us into some reduced inequalities. Again, another United Nations Sustainable Development Goal with reduced inequalities. We are so concerned with male sexuality and male pleasure. And that's been true throughout the centuries. Only recently have we really, within the last 50 years, that we started being interested at all in female sexuality, that female enjoyed sex. So if you look right in the middle, that is Alfred Kinsey. He basically came up with the idea that orgasm for women is normal. Note, that was not an idea that we had in marriage or lovemaking until the 1940s. So literally less than 100 years ago. Earlier on during the 1800s, female orgasm was seen as a medical problem. And so the first steam vibrators that were ever made were made for French asylum for women suffering anxiety. You can see that first vibrator all the way on the bottom. Female orgasm misunderstanding over time. Right? So a woman having too many orgasms was considered a sign of either hysteria or anxiety. And so they would be put into mental institutions and then pleasured, or to try to calm them down, to stimulate them to have an orgasm so they would be calmed down afterwards. This was considered a valid medical treatment and condition well into the 1900s. And that leads us to what the Greeks and what we still have as a problem with today is this. How do we define pornography? If you don't know, what is the difference between art and pornography? And that becomes a real issue. Supreme Court Justice P. Stewart once said, I'll know it when I see it, which is very strange because people will believe different things are pornography over others. So for example, what do we do with this particular image here? Let's see if I can't do it now. There we go. What do we do with the image of the Aphrodite of Cnidus? A nude woman who was caught unawares, that was so erotic that men and women both would masturbate and have sex. It would compel them. Isn't that what the point of pornography is? So much so that they put the Aphrodite of Cnidus, as you can see right here where the cursor is, on coins that they used to pay soldiers with as a marker of sexual services. The definition of pornography, or pornography itself, literally means drawings or writings about prostitutes. And so Frin was a prostitute, so maybe this is pornography. Playboy with Marilyn Monroe, or we can actually look and see the penis image over here. That is actually about 8 inches long, and it was actually a marker. It was used for the erect phallus. If you went to the city of Pompeii in Roman times, those markers would mark, because it was a city for pleasure and for passion, the erect phallus would guide you to the prostitution market. And so you would know exactly where the prostitutes were. Why? It was etched in the stones of the city of Pompeii. Then you would go into the prostitution house and you would look up, and it would actually give you a list of prices for whatever sexual services you were looking at. So pornography and prostitution is very, very common in the ancient world, both in the Greek world and the Roman world. And so the question then becomes, I'll know it when I see it for pornography. That becomes a problem because different people know and see pornography different. For example, the artwork right here that we've been talking about, the Aphrodite of Kainos. I'm sorry, the Aphrodite of Kainos. Is that pornography? Because technically, when we think about pornography, if pornography is the definition of drawings or pictures or paintings or artwork of nude prostitutes, it would fall under that. But is that artwork so indecent? Because that artwork was not meant for titillation, was not meant for masturbation, was not meant to make people aroused. That artwork was specifically meant to show the beauty and the gender roles of women. That women on some level needed to be protected because of their overwhelming essence that would drive men mad, particularly if they were to come in. Remember, the common thing that would happen to women and to their families if you were not around is that if an invading army came in, they would rape your women. They would kill your children. And so that's why you always had to be in shape if you were a man working out. And so gang rape is actually quite common during this time period in the both Greek and the Roman world, as we don't really get rid of that until much later within society. So the US Supreme Court ruling on pornography, it's a very strange ruling. It is called, so number one, if it's an illegal sexual activity, then it's automatically porn. Child porn, by taking pictures of people that are underneath the age of 18. That's child pornography. It's illegal everywhere. So by definition, that's pornography. Number two, is it in the local or prurient interest? Do the locals find it acceptable? But think about this. This is not a national law. That means people in rural Ohio or rural Iowa in the Christian Bible, they have very different images of what is pornography versus here in Miami or in Fort Lauderdale, which are some of the capitals of where we actually make a lot of porn. And number three, does it have any artistic, educational, or scientific value? If it doesn't have any artistic, educational, or scientific value, then it's porn. If it has any artistic, educational, or scientific value, it's not porn. Now here's the challenge. Name one image that you have ever seen that has no artistic, no educational, or no scientific value. Every image does. By definition, every image can educate, can challenge, can ask a philosophical question. Even if you hated the image, if it's a blank image, it could be asking, what is the concept of art? Is this art? And so basically it comes down to, do the locals like it and find it acceptable? And number two, is it depict legal activities? So for example, there's a Supreme Court case that's going on. It does involve a Florida student. Florida student went to the University of Iowa. He downloaded some porn on his computer one weekend night. His roommate wasn't there. His roommate was a Christian conservative. When he came in home, he found his friend, or his roommate, we'll call it, because maybe you don't do this to a friend, but found his roommate masturbating to that porn, which he had downloaded. Now the question is that an illegal download? Because in the local community, they would not find that legal. It wasn't in the prurient interest. And so even though he downloaded that, if he was in Miami or brought it from Miami, would have been considered perfectly normal, his roommate basically said, that's disgusting, that's immoral, that goes against what the code of conduct is in our particular university, and he's currently waiting trial in the state of Iowa for indecent sexual activity. If he is convicted of downloading porn on his computer that is not in the local prurient interest, he will be recognized and have to declare wherever he moves for the rest of his life as a sexual deviant. He'll have to register with the police. That's ridiculous. That's why sometimes when we look at these things, these artworks matter. These artworks ask us and challenge us to understand the world and the intent of what goes behind it. So, is the Marilyn Monroe porn? Is Spear Bearer porn? Is the Aphrodite of Knidos porn? The Aphrodite of Knidos, as on all the way on the right, or all the way on the left, I'm sorry, the Spear Bearer all the way on the right. Both of those teachers have shown those in high school art classes. And sometimes if the high school student shows their parents get upset, files lawsuits that their teacher has shown them porn. This recently happened with the Aphrodite of Colossus. Teacher showed a high school student that particular artwork, the Aphrodite of Colossus, a nude female, which is covered up, one of the most important artworks in the entire history of humanity, and that Miami-Dade high school art teacher was fired for indecently exposing students to something they should not have been exposed to. It's insane. I do it in college. We let you know beforehand. This is a college level course. There's going to be nudity within the course that shows up. But in high school, there's very little ramification that a teacher has. But she was fired for this. Now, as we're looking at women, and we often talk about kind of the greatest ideas from last time, some of the greatest minds in history, Aristotle and Plato, don't think Aristotle got everything right. So here's a couple ideas about Aristotle that are just wrong. In sexual union, basically during sex, the male was the generator and the female was the receptacle, which led men to regard women as an imperfect and incomplete version of men. So basically, a woman screwed up and had a girl rather than a boy. They didn't blame the man, which we now know it's more the man's fault if this particularly happens, with kind of what the process of biology shows us. But the woman would get blamed. She's like, if she had a perfect man, congratulations, you didn't screw this up. If you had a girl, what the hell did you do wrong? So the woman would get blamed for this. And remember, in a perfect society, men are better than women in ancient Greece than beneath us. Between male and female, the former is by nature superior and ruler. That's us guys. The later inferior and subject. Sorry, girls. And this must be true for mankind in general. For the slave by nature is he that can only recognize reason. Ladies, you can only recognize reason according to Aristotle. You cannot form it at all. So if I were to come home and you were my wife and you hadn't done what I told you to do, and I said, well, why didn't you do this? Your response should not be, well, I didn't do this because you don't have enough rationale to reason. You should just say, I'm sorry I didn't get around to it. I'm sorry, I will do it right now. That should be the response because I am superior and in nature and am ruler, and you do not have enough will, enough knowledge, enough larger brain that we've actually articulated with our 1/7 size head, even though our heads are only 1/8. We've actually proven it through art, even though it really doesn't exist in nature. That's what we're looking at. It's a very strange feature that shows up. So that's one of the things that shows up, that Aristotle is one of maybe the brightest man in history behind Da Vinci, or maybe right even in front of Da Vinci, just got absolutely wrong. And so then we end up with other famous images, basically in the Aphrodite of Colossus model, such as the Venus de Milo, the idea of absolute perfection. Note, in this particular case, she actually does have some clothes on. So covering up a little bit of that. And the Nike, the goddess of victory, whenever she alights, and so all the way on the left is the one that's actually in the Louvre, and it's about 12 feet tall. All the way on the right is a reconstructed one that actually shows the wreath and the entire figure of Nike, the goddess. And you can note the Nike logo actually gets pulled out of her wings. That swoop that comes up here, that's what we're actually looking at. Beyonce, in her video, the Ape Shit video by her and her husband, the Carters, basically does a huge dance wearing the same type of costume as the Nike of Samothrace. And note, with her throwing out, gets rid of the stillness. But remember, women are allowed to behave that way, right? They have the smaller head size. So we expect them at some point to make mistakes and lose their idea of calm, not be completely in control at different aspects, whereas men are always supposed to be in control. At the end of the Greek period, and this is true of almost any art period you want to look at, the art starts looking different. So the Hellenistic period is the area where Greek expands its culture through Alexander the Great, going to the very end of the Greek culture when it collapses, basically under its own weight, and with the help of the Roman professional army and navy that actually starts to come in, still fighting in phalanxes. So the idea of the Greek expansion called Hellenistic is kind of, think about it. Helen went to Troy, whether she was abducted during the Iliad or whether she went willingly. She brought Greek, or her type of culture, Hellenistic culture, to Troy, and started to civilize that culture a little bit. And so that's why we get the idea of Hellenistic spreading out. The Hellenistic period, the features of it, if you look at it all the way on the right, note there are some notable differences between Hellenistic features art and Greek art. You still have that beautiful body, you still have contrapposto poses, but what's different between Hellenistic art at the end of Greek culture and the actual classical culture of spear bearer of Aphrodite of Cnidus? That is correct. We're going to get this expressionistic. Remember that vocabulary word actually showed up from our aesthetic vocabulary. And I said it's pretty rare in Art History 1. But what we are looking at here is expressionism is when you have the distortion of reality to get an emotional reaction across. And that's exactly what's happening. This is not how really people act if snakes are really attacking them. Right? There's going to be a very different approach. And even notice the size differential between Lacan right here and his two sons that are next to him. We have a group composition. It's very dramatic and very theatrical. We look at this artwork for two reasons. One, it's one of the great classical artworks of the Hellenistic period. Right? It really does show you all the hallmark features of how Greek artwork expanded. Number two, this artwork is very important because later on, it's going to show up in the Vatican collections where the Pope lives and works. And in about 1480, there's a young 12-year-old boy wandering around. And that young boy in 1480, 1490 starts drawing, gets mesmerized this figure, starts drawing this figure. That little boy that is inspired to become an artist because of this figure is Michelangelo. And without this artwork, we don't know if he would have ever gotten that excited and inspired to draw to get accepted into basically a master's workshop. Now, periodically, we like to introduce you to other careers in the art which you may have never thought of or heard of. So one career opportunity in art is what someone is called a cultural conservator. They basically do cleaning and they stabilize and they restore artworks. The salary starts off very, very high. So it starts off, excuse me, about $50,000. Sometimes the salary can go up to more than $200,000, depending upon what aspect of conservation you are in. It generally is an MA for arts conservation, and you get to work with some of the coolest objects on earth. Here on the left-hand side over here, you can see him actually cleaning off Michelangelo's David's nose, the huge 18-foot tall sculpture, which is basically spear bearer in the modern day world. We had a conservator last year that came into Miami-Dade College that charges $200 an hour for his work on some of our outdoor sculptures. And he gets to work on some very cool things. He specializes in metal, outdoor metal. And so the last project he had before he worked at Miami-Dade College is he came in, he was working on the outdoor space ship Columbia, which is actually up in Port Canaveral, and spent a couple months actually restoring the outside of that particular artwork. And as we're slowly kind of thinking about the end of both male and female beauty up through the Greek period, we've already done the male project today. Let's see if we want to do the female project. Here what I'd like you to do. I would like you to review female beauty since our earliest artworks. This is actually a midterm question. So if you can do this, you're in really good shape for the midterm because it means, again, you've already got that big brain visual Rolodex of objects in front of you about beauty. So what I'd like you to do is draw an image of a female figure in each historical style we have studied so far. And again, we're going to have four. We have the prehistoric art world, we have the Mesopotamian art world, we have the Egyptian art world, and we have the Greek art world. And you will notice in prehistoric Mesopotamian and Egyptian, in each one of those, we have three different models of female beauty. Whether we're looking at three-dimensional sculpture or flat painting in sculpture, there's a different version of each. I'm only asking you to draw one of each and then try to figure out how these changed over time. So if you want to do this activity, by all means, pause this particular video. I'll give you a second to pause it, and then I will show you and walk through what those images actually look like if you don't want to do it on your own. So here they are. Prehistoric, remember, you could have the stick figure with the stick breasts coming out, which we saw once, or the Venus of Willendorf, or the Venus women figures that show up with those obese features which allowed for survival during the Ice Ages. Mesopotamian, you could have the composite pose image that we looked at, trying to separate us and make us different than the animals. Or you could actually have this columnar body, note, no beard, wide open eyes so that you're always telling the truth. An Egyptian model, you could have that composite pose as you see here with the yellow images, the yellow color, or the one next to it is also the Egyptian model, which is where we get more realism, not full realism. And then with the Greek, with the Aphrodite of Cnidus, we moved to full idealism from realism thanks to the Iliad. We needed to be able to pick people in very realistic but an idealist perfect sets to establish our gender roles, because these people were the models that came out of the, the gold medal, the Olympic gold medal winners. The other thing to consider is that as we look at these cultures, and we'll do this with our own culture in the future, we come up with a cultural relativism checklist. And so in the ancient Greek world, they bought slaves with salt. And so that gives us our idea of not worth his salt. Remember, salt was as valuable as money. We talked about that last time, actually in Mesopotamia, where the word salary actually comes from. How much salt were you actually being paid? A nidesme, which is a string that holds up the penis in public. If you were walking around in public in a gymnasium or somewhere else, you need something to hold that penis so it doesn't kind of flail around. You'd hold a nidodesme, would actually hold you up. Ancient Greeks also believed in zombies, the idea of the dead coming back to life. They took serious precautions to keep them from rising out of their graves. An idiot is anyone who didn't participate in politics, so those were idiota. And prostitutes actually would wear red lipstick to actually indicate that they were prostitutes and not just an average woman that was out for some reason without a man within the streets, bringing attention to your lips. From our sculpture then of what we've seen, we can play the challenge game that we've played before of A to Z. So you can think of an artwork, a personality, an invention, or an aesthetic from each letter of the alphabet about ancient Greece, from each letter that shows up. 10 minutes. So for example, the god for Z is Zeus. So can you come up with all those difficult letters? A, B, C, D, but particularly, can you come up with an X, a Y, a W? Those are the harder ones to come up with. Good luck. And that will end our tour of Greek sculpture. The next time that I see you, we'll be talking about Greek architecture and then later on Greek theater. I wish you all a wonderful kind of day, and you can go back and review this as often as you would like. Please remember there is a top 10 list in your Blackboard site then created by honor students that specifically goes through and runs through kind of the great sculptural achievements of what we just went over in style. So by all means, have a great day. Bye.